Hello, I'm Sally Burdett. Welcome to Global Business Europe. Our top stories. China lays out a roadmap to ensure carbon emission goals are reached by 2030 without affecting growth. Global stock markets on a roller coaster ride. Shares on Wall Street edge higher again despite ongoing US-Iran attacks. And fury at Volkswagen. The German automaker says up to 100,000 jobs might have to go as the iconic brand struggles in a new era of motoring. China has released a new 5-year plan aimed at ensuring carbon emissions peak by the year 2030. Recent studies have shown that China's fossil fuel emissions are already flatlining. So what are the key targets of this plan? By 2030, China will aim to cut emissions per unit of GDP by 17% from 2025 levels. And that means really that the economy will produce less carbon for every unit of growth. The country's total energy use from non-fossil fuel sources, such as renewables, hydro, nuclear, will rise to 25% by 2030. That includes everything from electricity, cooking and heating to manufacturing and construction. The plan also accelerates the green transition of industry with targets to build around 100 zero-carbon industrial parks and hundreds of zero-carbon factories nationwide. Electric and hybrid vehicles are expected to account for around 30% of all vehicles on the roads by 2030. That's more than double the current share. Now, China's car sector is already playing its part, with hybrids and EVs making up 60% of new car sales in June, and exports of those vehicles up by 160%. Now, Laurie Muller-Werter is the lead analyst at the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air.
Getting China's emissions to peak and decline is, of course, the first and the most important step to bringing global emissions down. And so realizing that is a huge contribution. Obviously, China's emissions have already stabilized for the past couple of years, so this is hopefully more about securing that stable plateau and eventual decline rather than stopping growth, because that's already been achieved.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, growth is a really big issue here because China wants to keep growing. It wants factories to continue working at peak performance. It wants to continue with its electric vehicles. And, of course, data centres and the demands of AI. Is that going to become increasingly difficult, though, to get that balance right?
Rapid energy demand growth has been a challenge for China for the past 2 decades, but China's shown that it's more than capable of deploying enough clean energy, whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, to meet that demand growth, as long as the enabling conditions are there. That's a challenge that China is equipped to face. From the perspective of economic growth, clean energy sectors, such as the manufacturing of solar and electric vehicles and batteries, are a key economic driver. So I would argue that that rather than conflicting goals, making sure that clean energy growth continues and emissions come down as a result is a prerequisite for meeting the economic goals.
When it comes to vehicles and transport, by 2030, China wants 30% of all vehicles on the road to be electric. The current figure is around 12%, so that's quite a leap in just 4 or so years. What impact could that have on China's transport emissions?
Very quick calculation says that a 20 percentage point increase in the share of electric vehicles could cut transport sector oil consumption by the same 20%, and transportation uses about half of all the oil in China. So it could deliver a very significant reduction in overall oil consumption, which then definitely helps with climate goals, also helps massively with energy security.
As you mentioned, carbon emissions have been levelling out in China for a little while now. But really hitting these goals and making the transformations, what impact is that going to have not only on the global emissions picture, but also in terms of the example that China is giving the rest of the world?
China's, of course, the largest industrial power and concentration of heavy industry in the world, and economically seen as a success story. So being able to peak and decline emissions will show that a major emerging industrial power can be powered by clean energy. I think also it will also enable China to take a stronger, more proactive role in international climate policy, because China won't have to defend increases in its own emissions anymore. They will be able to say that they have gotten on top of this problem.
Laurie Miliverta there. Now, one of the many Chinese car makers leading the charge in electric vehicles is NIO. Catherine Drew spoke to Danilo Teobaldi, NIO's principal chief engineer.
I see more and more differentiation between the Chinese market and the European UK market. In China, there is a much larger penetration of electric vehicle. With that, all the performance linked to the engine are granted. Any car right now can do 0-100 in 4 seconds, 5 seconds. And to do the same in a gasoline car, you would need, I don't know how many horsepower, right? That would be already a super high-spec car. Because that is granted, then the next step is so what I'm looking into in the car. And then there is a lot of research that honestly NIO started in the suspension side, because you want a lot of ride comfort, right? And therefore there is a lot of discussion on active suspension and which technology will be the winning in the future for active suspension and smooth ride. And then since the car become quieter and smoother in the ride, you start to pay attention to what you can do inside the car. Now, majority of the car in China, they provide a fridge, integrated, not just a separate box, but integrated in the design of the car. There is a fridge, which again in Europe would be strange for the time being. But when you drive electric, effectively, why do I need to have the pain of entering the car and having the car at 100 degrees because I park under the sun when I'm at the sea beach, for example? And then why the water in the car need to be also 100 degrees when I can precondition the car and drink water at 15 degrees because I have a fridge, which is powered by this gigantic battery that I have in the car. So all this is gradually evolving. The direction of is even a key selling factor right now, right?
I'm capable of helping with car functions, navigation, and more.
And then there is a very large element, very big element of research is definitely the digital connectivity, digital technologies. Everything goes in the cloud, and these open up very high computing power, of course, and these open up, of course, autonomous drive, but many other functions. So in some of the NIO products, actually in the second generation already, and even more in the third generation, we have what we call the 4D dynamics. And the 4D dynamics is basically, as long as few cars pass over a bump, a pothole, and so on, that will be registered, sent to the cloud, is available to entire fleet. So if more cars pass there, they will be aware of this is happening. And if you're driving, for example, with your suspension in rigid mode, sport mode, the suspension automatically will adapt to let you glide through the pothole and then bring the sport version again.
Market news now. It's been a record day for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, with 7 Chinese mainland companies making their debut, the most to be simultaneously listed. The IPOs raised a total of nearly $5 billion, which is also a record for the largest single-day fundraising this year. The 7 new listed companies span smart tech, food, robotics and electronic devices. The Japanese retail conglomerate that owns clothing outlet Uniqlo says quarterly earnings have been hit by the record heatwave in Europe. The chief financial officer said some stores faced temporary closures and many customers stayed at home because of the weather. Uniqlo said it's now exploring ways of how to keep its European stores cool. Shares in British pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca have dropped 9% on disappointing drug trial news. Now, it was hoped that the medicine known as Wainua could help patients with a rare heart condition, but it did not reduce heart-related conditions compared to the placebo. Well, Wall Street is a bit more optimistic after Wednesday's losses. This is despite continued attacks in the Middle East. Oil prices have dropped slightly from a 2-week high, while rising chip makers have helped outweigh geopolitical anxieties. Let's speak now to our correspondent Mitch McCann, who is in New York. Hello, Mitch. So stocks have been rising a little today, despite this, what's going on in the Middle East. How's it looking at the moment?
Yeah, good afternoon from New York, Sally. Look, it is looking positive so far this afternoon for investors. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 0.34% this afternoon. The S&P 500 up to 0.7% and the Nasdaq up to 0.9%. And this is being driven by investors moving back towards semiconductor and chip stocks, and by that oil price dropping slightly, as you mentioned, despite the renewed tensions in the Middle East. If we look at which stocks in the semiconductor space are surging today, Micron, the American semiconductor company, it is up 8% this afternoon. SanDisk, which we've talked about many times in recent weeks, it's up 8.8% today. And the VanEck Semiconductor ETF, which holds 25 semiconductor stocks, it's up around 3.5% today. So plenty of movement for semiconductor stocks. One of the interesting points to note here is this is a continuation of what we've been seeing in recent weeks, where investors appear to be selling off stocks in the big tech companies to put their money into semiconductor stocks. And while semiconductors and chips are up today, many of the companies in the Magnificent Seven are down. Amazon, Nvidia, Microsoft and Google among them, all a short time ago, were down. Now, the other point I mentioned here relates to the price of oil. Now, Brent crude was edging toward $80 yesterday amid these renewed tensions in the Middle East, but it's back down to around $76 at the moment after President Trump said that Iran had called to make a deal, but no update on that. Now, however, this is really an interesting time for investors. This tit-for-tat escalation that we're seeing seems far from over, so it's going to be important that we keep watching the oil price in the in the coming days. Of course, at some point in recent weeks, it really skyrocketed, but it has been brought back down. So I think consumers here in the US especially will be hopeful that that price does remain low.
Let's focus a little on SpaceX now. It's made its debut on NASDAQ, but its share price is dropping. Why?
Yeah, that's right. A couple of moments ago, when I last checked, SpaceX was back to around $150 a share. It closed at the last 2 days at around $148 a share, which is lower than where it opened on the 12th of June at its IPO debut. This is another example of the whiplash that we've been seeing with this stock since it went public in June. A week after that IPO, it hit $200. Now, as I mentioned, it's back down to $150. So it's been very up and down. And I think there is some nervousness from investors when you consider a couple of things. One is that SpaceX issued bonds after its IPO to refinance an earlier loan. Investors are also weighing how much cash it's going to burn through and how much more it might need in the coming years. But one thing we've heard from a lot of people in finance is that this wasn't a stock people bought hoping that they would see immediate gains. This was a long-term bet on a company that has lost quite a lot of money this year already, but in the long term they're hoping it will become very, very profitable for those that got in June for that IPO. So a lot more to come, I think, on this stock that continues to move up and then down again.
Interesting indeed. Thank you so much, Mitch McCann in New York. This is Global Business Europe. Still ahead, a day of reckoning for the German car industry. Mass protests as Volkswagen considers mass layoffs. We're live in Berlin shortly.
everything is a business story.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Sally Baudet. Your headlines. China lays out a roadmap to ensure carbon emission goals are reached by 2030 without affecting economic growth. And global stock markets on a roller coaster ride. Shares on Wall Street edge higher again despite those ongoing US-Iran attacks. Bosses at Volkswagen are holding crunch talks on what could be the car industry's biggest ever restructuring as unions hold protests across Germany. Now, the car giant is considering whether to cut up to 100,000 jobs and close a number of factories. VW says it's responding to weak demand, rising costs, US tariffs and fierce competition from China. But workers say they will fight to protect jobs and the future of the German car industry. Our correspondent Peter Oliver joins us now from Berlin. Hello, Peter. What's been happening there?
Hi. Everything's been happening, not so much here in Berlin, but elsewhere around the country. We're staring down the barrel of what would be, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest restructuring in Volkswagen's history. In fact, it would be at least one of the biggest restructurings of a major German corporation has happened at least in the last decade. Oliver Blume, the CEO of the Volkswagen Group, is currently locked in a room with the supervisory board of that huge organization, laying out his plan for major restructuring, major cost-cutting as well. 100,000 jobs, that's 15% of VW's global workforce, set to be axed by 2030, 2031. That's as long as the board agree to Mr. Bloom's plans. And they'd already agreed to allow 50,000 or so jobs to be slashed across the group by 2030. He's now looking to double that even more and add into the mix the closure of 3 VW plants in Germany and 1 Audi plant as well. The reasons why he's putting this across are many, but can really be summed up down to the line of they're just not selling enough of their cars. There's been a drop-off in sales in China, which was a massive market for VW. There's also huge competition for VW from China, from those Chinese EV manufacturers coming here to the European market. High German labour costs have been cited, as they usually are. Excess production has also made it onto that list, and the tariffs put in place by Donald Trump and the United States, and the uncertainty globally, the fallout from the US attacks on Iraq and the conflict on Iran and the conflict going on there as well, and disruptions to trade routes. All of those coming together to have a huge impact upon VW, or the Volkswagen Group, in fact, and that's why Oliver Blume is, well, currently, as I say, still locked in those talks. He's been there for just over 6 hours or so, as I understand right now, trying to convince the board that slashing these jobs is the right way forward.
We know that the unions are really unhappy, obviously, about this. What are they saying? How are they countering this argument that there are just not enough sales? And has there been a political response?
I mean, how have the unions reacted? They've reacted in a highly organised way, and immediately we've seen protests at 18 different Volkswagen sites around Germany on Thursday. IG Metall, the union that represents workers in the VW Group, extremely unhappy at the proposals that Oliver Blume is putting forward. Interest or political opposition to this. You've got to remember that the state of Lower Saxony, Germany split into 16 different states, the state of Lower Saxony is actually the second largest shareholder in the VW Group. So the current Minister-President of the state of Lower Saxony sits on that advisory board, that VW board. Which is one of the reasons why these talks will have gone on for so long, because nothing coming out of those talks where amongst the board can be agreed on, can be signed off on, unless every single person agrees. It's highly unlikely that the Social Democrat leader of the state of Lower Saxony is going to back this move. And that's also echoing what we're hearing from up here in Berlin, where, of course, the Social Democrats are part of the ruling coalition government here in Berlin that rules the country rules nationally. So, yes, there's going to be major political pushback on this, and which, of course, you would expect. We're talking about so many jobs in such a crucial blue chip industry here in Germany. It's one of those industries that Germany prides itself on so much. Investors might be a little easier to win over, especially if Oliver Bloom can prove, or at least show them, that his plan could lead to an increase in profits and in competitiveness. But next is just to see whether Oliver Bloom can convince the board. Then the fun stuff starts, because IG Metall will push back massively and expect that to be a long, drawn-out, hard-fought road before we see any type of layoffs. But 2030, 2031, not too long away from now. So if they're going to get this done, they're going to have to get it done pretty sharpish.
Thank you so much for that update. That's our correspondent Peter Oliver reporting from Berlin. Now, the price of smartphones, tablets and other consumer electronics are on the rise. It's driven by AI and a global shortage of memory chips. But a Chinese chip maker has emerged as a potential alternative, with even tech giant Apple keen to take a bite. Our reporter Mark New has more.
Consumer electronics prices are on the rise.
Sony had to raise the PS5 by $100, which is huge. Even the Switch 2, Nintendo had to raise it by $50, which is, unheard of. GoPro said they might have to file bankruptcy, partly because of memory costs. Apple, of all folks, which does probably the best job of anybody managing supply chain, they had to start raising prices. The MacBook Neo, the cheapest one, was lauded for being $599. Now it's $699. If Apple can't hold the line, nobody can hold the line.
For the international market, there are three main corporations fabricating consumer product random access memory chips. Two in South Korea, Samsung and SK Hynix, and one in the U.S., Micron Technology. But due to the demand from AI data centers, the three production giants are now devoting a greater portion of their limited resources to produce high bandwidth memory chips instead.
So there's 80% margins on these AI chips versus the 10 to 20% margins on consumer-facing chips. A lot of data centers are repurposing their data centers to be AI-focused. I don't see much relief because the increase in usage just continues to grow.
And so now data centers are soaking up something like 70% of the world's memory. And everyone else is fighting over whatever's left for use in the consumer devices, right? The phones and the laptops that we rely on.
On July 6th, SK Hynix, which has more than 60% of the high bandwidth memory market, launched a U.S. share sale to raise $28 billion. But for standard consumer RAM chips, Chinese company CXMT has emerged as another option. So much so that Apple is now testing them in its devices sold in China.
Right now, everyone's starting to kind of look to China. A company called CXMT has gone from almost nothing to the world's fourth largest DRAM maker in about 2 years. Apple, they're arguably the most powerful buyer in consumer electronics, and they're essentially asking Washington for permission to buy memory from a CXMT, a Chinese company. What they're wanting is a guarantee that the U.S. government won't tighten the rules and effectively strand them mid-contract.
Without more chip options, analysts see little hope of prices falling anytime soon. In fact, Micron CEO even admitted that chip supplies will be constrained beyond 2027 due to the fact that it takes years to build fabrication plants.
Everybody talks about food inflation at restaurants, at the grocery stores and whatnot, but boom, when you're hit with this, even buying a new Apple laptop or just a memory card or a flash drive, it affects a whole new broad segment.
Fung says a big test will be the year-end holiday shopping season, when retailers and tech companies will need to get extra creative with pricing strategies to satisfy consumers while making ends meet. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
Now, Spain has approved an $8 billion plan that will triple government investment in public housing. Madrid's property shortage has left many Spaniards locked out of buying or even renting a home. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports from Mallorca.
Caravanistas, the Spanish word used for people forced to live in caravan settlements because of skyrocketing house and rent prices. Begonia Iglesias Moreno lives here at the Son Hugo caravan camp, one of dozens dotted around Mallorca.
Que puedes ver que es mi hogar.
So this is your home?
Sí, mi sala de estar, por decirlo así, mi salón.
Living room.
Cocina.
Kitchen, and here are your two beds.
Yeah.
So this is where you sleep, and this is where your son sleeps.
Yes.
Begonia is 62, and like the vast majority of the Son Hugo residents, works full-time, as does her 24-year-old son. She is a parking inspector, he is a chef in a hotel.
I work 6 days a week, and with what my son and I earn put together, we still can't get a place.
Rent prices have more than doubled in the tourist hotspot of Mallorca over the past 10 years, and life in these caravan settlements isn't easy.
Inside the caravan.
The Spanish government announced over $8 billion in measures to address the crisis, with most of the money going to building new social housing, renovating old stock and providing subsidies for young people as well as the elderly and those living in areas under extreme market pressure. For Begonia, the most important measure is missing.
We need limits on tourist lets at 20 or 30% of housing or even less. The short-term tourist rentals need to go to the people who live and work here.
The new measures do include steps to take illegal tourist lets off websites like Airbnb, but they do not put strict limits on numbers. So does this new plan give people here hope?
People here don't really have much hope. Young people feel like they don't have a future. The only hope I have is to win the lottery. That's the only way I could afford to buy my own home.
Spain's ambitious housing announcement has yet to unlock much hope for those currently dealing with the extremes of Spain's housing crisis. Ken Brown, CGTN, Mallorca.
The headlines again. China lays out a roadmap to ensure carbon emission goals are reached by 2030 without affecting economic growth. Global stock markets on a roller coaster ride. Shares on Wall Street edge higher again despite ongoing US-Iran attacks. And fury at Volkswagen. The German automaker says up to 100,000 jobs might have to go as the iconic brand struggles in a new era of motoring. And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of us here in London, goodbye.